Good evening. We'll call the West Ada School Board meeting open. And first item is that we always do the Pledge of Allegiance. So if everybody will stand and join us. All right, well, welcome everybody. First, Clerk Newbold, are there any additional items for the agenda? Or additional information, excuse me.
Madam Chair, Trustees, Superintendent Reynolds, Dr. Bubb, I have attached all the patron comments as of yesterday at 12, and then the red line agenda is attached. We will be attaching the rest of the patron comments tomorrow after the meeting. Thank you.
Great, thank you. That was quite a list of people you had to say, but all the different superintendents and board members, and so thank you for doing that. The first item up on our agenda is to approve the amended agenda, and so I would entertain any motions to approve the amended agenda. Trustee Kofelt.
Madam Chair, I make a motion that we approve the amended agenda.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the amended agenda. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. Chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. So tonight we have a unique situation. We do this once a year where we have an open budget hearing. It's required by law, and so we'll open up the open budget hearing, and then we'll actually have to close it as well. And so it's sort of a separate meeting from our normal meeting. It's unique. So with that, I would ask for a motion to open up the budget hearing. Trustee Kofelt.
Madam Chair, I make a motion that we open the public hearing for the budget.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we open the public hearing for the budget. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. Chair votes aye as well. Motion carries 5-0. And so with that, Mr. Gillen, you're up for the open public budget hearing. Welcome.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Trustees, Dr. Reynolds. So the plan will be, we'll talk first about our 2021 amended budget, and then we'll roll into the 21-22 budget. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions in between. So first, let's talk about our 2021 amended budget, what we're going to plan to cover. I'm going to walk through some of the major changes. As you would anticipate, we make budget changes during the year. Things happen. Sometimes we make some guesses and projections of where we're going to start the year with revenues. A lot of the budget work happens as you know, in April, and we're a full 15 months away from when we did a lot of that work, right? And so as you would anticipate, some things change, especially in the COVID environment that we were in. We had a lot of expectations and thoughts about maybe where revenues were going to be and what enrollment was going to look like and how it was going to be calculated. So we'll walk through some of the prominent changes, a lot of things which hopefully you've heard about throughout the year. We'll talk about that for the general fund specifically. Then we'll discuss some highlights for some of the other funds. Then we'll talk a little about that CRF funding that we received, and we're going to walk through that because that is actually funds that we received from Treasury with guidance that we don't actually budget for those funds. And so we'll approve those as part of the process, but they're specifically unbudgeted funding that we received that were for unbudgeted expenditures. And so then I'll quickly talk about next steps, and then we'll finish the process for 2021. So some of the highlights, you don't have to spend a lot of time looking at this little picture here because Troy did a great job right before the board meeting of blowing it up and making it look a little bigger. But those are the things I'm going to talk about. I'm going to hit about fund balance, investment income. We're going to talk about a little about changes in base support and transportation. So when you look at the fund balance, right, we had a change from 35 to 39. I feel like I remember giving this presentation in June of last year where we were trying to figure out what is ending fund balance really going to look like. And so we had shot for a number around 35 to 36. As we started to kind of look at process, we had some expenses that changed, right? COVID impacted some of the timing of when we receive things, which then impacts when we can actually incur an expenditure. And so our fund balance was higher. I'll tell you that's not an unusual thing. You'll see it with the other funds. You'll often see it with budget adjustments. We'll kind of plan conservatively for our expectations of ending fund balance, and then we'll oftentimes and hopefully have a little surprise to the upside and a little bit of savings that we'll generate. Some of the other changes, we've talked about investment income more so for 21-22, but we made that change actually in 2021 with the change in the markets and our expectation of what investment income is going to look like. We already planned for the fact that this year we also were going to receive a reduction in income. Base support, that's our funding we receive from the state. As you anticipate, it's went down. A lot of that is going to be backfilled from some ESSER funding we're going to use this year. We'll talk about that in a couple of slides when you'll see the increase in the federal funding to offset those expenses. But if you remember, a lot of that was at the beginning of the year, we anticipated a 5% reduction, then that 5% reduction was restored, but then we received an offsetting discretionary reduction. And so essentially a lot of that reduction stayed in place, backfilled from ESSER. One of the major things that didn't make that number worse was our switch from ADA to enrollment. So that helped us a lot in 2021. You'll see some of the effects in 21-22 of switching back to ADA and coming out of enrollment and what that does for our budget. And then transportation just had some adjustments associated with the income we would anticipate. And then transfers in, a lot of that change was associated with our ESSER funding. When we originally received ESSER 1, so all the way back in May of last year, we kind of weren't sure exactly how it was going to flow through, whether it was general fund dollars, whether we were going to receive it in a federal funding stream, whether it was going to be a transfer in. And so a lot of that information we worked through essentially after the fiscal year happened. And so we had planned for a dollar amount we were going to receive. We knew it was going to offset the general fund and at least benefit the general fund in some way. So, but it's not via transfer in. We'll actually shift expenses out to federal programs. So it's going to be less revenues coming in and more expenses moving later on, which we'll talk about on the next slide. So amended budgets for expenditures. So what changed? We're going to walk through. These are going to be functional programs. You're going to talk about elementary school, secondary, instructional improvement, school admin, business operations. Again, a lot of things that when we talked about 21-22, even just in May of just last month, and we talked about the impact year over year, you're going to see a lot of those changes with both the 2021 portion as well. So what changed in elementary and secondary? We had adjustments based on when the 5% came back. A piece of that holdback that did come back to us was a salary-based apportionment, so we had some extra dollars that came into those line items. And then you're seeing the ESSER effect in the elementary school program of our identification of these are expenses we can shift out to federal programs, to the ESSER funding to be able to backfill the reductions in revenues associated with our budget. And then instructional improvement, you probably noticed an increase there for those of you who, well, you don't live in my world all day long, so that's function 621, so it's line 19. I'll try to reference those as I work through. You're going to notice that went up about $1 million. That was the textbook adoption for math that we're anticipating finishing this year. So those were some dollars we identified specifically there that we wanted to put. So that was an addition in the budget. The school admin, that's 641. That was associated with that retirement severance. If you remember this year, we were planning on paying that, and then we got a reprieve for that expense this year, and so we were able to adjust the budget and recognize some savings. And then 651, the business operations area, that's line 27. That went up roughly $500,000. That was the area where a lot of the non-personnel related COVID expenses, if we had to purchase PP&E or if we had to look to purchase a dollar amount associated with desk barriers or any of the plexiglass kind of things, those we don't really have an area set up for that necessarily. So we put it in there because that's an area where I manage the budget. So you'll see an increase in there in expenses and budgeted expenditures just so that I could manage those costs as we went along. And then transportation, you'll see an offset in the expenditures, so a reduction, and that was us trying to calculate what we think our recapture rate, the reduction in transportation costs were going to be, and what that really means for ending fund balance, and where we think we'll try to end the year as far as ending fund balance goes.
Mr. Gillen, do you want folks to ask, if they have any questions, you want them to ask as you go through these, or do you want to wait till the end?
Madam Chair, trustees, feel free to ask along the way. I think that's what we did the last time, so that'll work perfect.
Okay, great, thank you.
Your guys' questions weren't fast enough for me to do that.
What are you drinking?
Awkward.
Is it an energy drink ready for the questions?
Last time I had just enough gap, I could make it not. I was trying to figure out how I was going to do that and not have it feel weird, but it was weird. Let's just go.
It wasn't
right?
weird until you called it out, I don't think.
You know, that's also awkward for me, too. All right, so amended budget. So you're going to see transfers out. So we talked a little bit at the last board meeting about we were going to look at setting up reserve funds and what that looks like. And so really for this, you're not going to see potentially what the dollar amount it is we're going to transfer out this year. And that's because we really got to get to calculating ending fund balance before I can tell you what that dollar amount is. And so for now, what you're seeing is you're seeing a placeholder. It's line, this doesn't have lines. When you go towards the bottom, transfers out $430,384. I'll talk about the $384 separately, but essentially the $450,000 was a $150,000 placeholder associated with an allocation out to the reserve funds. So it's us kind of getting used to that process. What does it look like? How do we see it in the budget? Obviously, we'll be able to provide you some more information early to mid-August as we finish drafting financial statements of what that looks like, what our fund balance is, what we can kind of start setting aside for those big purchases like IT and textbooks that are coming through. And then the $384 was just an overage in a fund that we were fixing this year, so nothing too exciting.
Mr. Gillen, can I ask, just because on that last slide, at the top on number 700, insurance judgment, the 773, is that a normal expense or is that something kind of abnormal for us?
773. Help me out a smidge. Which line are you looking at?
So if you go across the top of the categories, like we have 100 for salary, 200 for benefits, if you go over to 700 for insurance judgment.
Oh, that's insurance expenses. So that's just liability insurance.
Normal cost, okay.
Yeah, normal
thank you.
cost. Unfortunately, I didn't get to pick the codes they use. I would have just said liability insurance and called it good. So amended budget. Oh, are there other questions before I move on with the general fund? Perfect. All right. So other funds. So now we're going to walk through all of those other funding sources. And so we're going to talk about special revenue funds, capital projects funds. We're going to talk about debt service funds. We're going to talk about everything really outside of the general fund. And so for the most part, a lot of these impacts, some of them happen, a lot of the funding streams that we have that will come in after the fact are usually associated with federal funding. So a lot of those get adjusted during the year. A lot of those budgets will happen because we won't often receive our allocation numbers until after July and August. And so a lot of those adjustments, while they are budget adjustments, they're really with an anticipated process. We anticipate that we'll have adjustments in July as stuff gets finalized. Even sometimes into September and October, we'll continue to receive budget adjustments associated with federal funding as enrollments are finalized. So again, what you're going to see a lot with this one is you're going to see a fund balance increase, much like you saw with the last one, right? We had our expectations of where fund balance would be, and we came in a little higher. A lot of that actually has to do with capital projects. Some of those can have pretty big swings just with one invoice that I anticipated would come before June 30, but that work didn't happen until July. And so, that can have a change as you would anticipate. And then you'll notice some other funding with title funding, and then specifically a lot of the other changes you'll notice in line 66, which is all the way there on the right, about 2/3 of the way down. You're going to see it went from 1.5 million to 15 million. That is your ESSER funding. And so that is a lot of the changes associated with the fact that when we planned the budget last year, we were not anticipating that kind of ESSER funding increase coming in. And again, this is not all the ESSER funding the district that received, but this is the funding allocated to 2021 specifically as appropriated by the state board, or the State Department in the legislature. We talk about, expenditures. My apologies. A lot of the changes in expenditures associated with these is all going to revolve around one-to-one. So essentially, you're going to see some changes associated with a lot of the ESSER expenditures. You'll see that we had just some changes in salaries, right, and some movement, but a lot of the capital-related shifts were associated with one-to-one. We anticipated spending costs here. We decided to not do those things as we look to instead spend those dollars on one-to-one technology. And so you'll notice a lot of the capital-associated changes occurred because of that. Questions on the other funds before I roll into CRF funding? Perfect. So CRF funding, these slides you've already seen before. So they should look familiar. You've seen them probably 2 or 3 times as we've kind of prepped for that federal funding presentation. So this was dollars that we received that were again from Department of Treasury, which is a different area than the district usually receives funding. And so we're used to receiving funding from title and from education funds. Department of Treasury is not usually an area we would receive it from. And so they have some different rules, again, associated with unbudgeted expenditures. I can tell you, as our auditors have done their May interim field work and part of their federal audit, part of the questions they asked us was, were these for unbudgeted dollars, right? Unbudgeted expenditures, unbudgeted expectation of that happening. So we've received money for distance and blended learning. This number's been adjusted a little bit from what you've seen in the past. We actually received an additional allocation just last month. And so we were able to allocate some additional dollars to distance learning and blended learning technology, so offset some device costs. We did receive USDA funding this year. We received it in August. It was actually for expenses occurred in not even last fiscal year, but the fiscal year before, so 1920, especially when the pandemic just started. So that was actually offsetting expenditures occurred in March and April of 1920, which you can do and is allowable to do as long as the federal funding award occurs in the year after. And so that's when it actually was provided to us in July and August. Coronavirus relief funding. We purchased LMSs, so Seesaw and Ingenuity. We purchased textbooks, additional staff time associated with curriculum development, IT supplies, hotspots. Again, a lot of things you've already heard about, FFCRA leave, a whole lot of PP&E. And so we also utilized vans this year. $80,000 was the amount applied to the coronavirus relief funding. There was more costs than that, but that was the dollars we had available from this fund. And then we provided stipends to staff. We also offset expenses in the general fund, so 2 PD days for instructional staff. We had some nursing costs, which we were able to allocate against the fund. And so that totaled $3.4 million. With those savings, much like hopefully you remember and we talked about, right, we used it to offset the fact that we didn't have a budget for the $1 million in hotspots, right? So we were able to offset some of that with CRF money, but when that timing ended, now the second half we used the savings to be able to pay for that. The math textbook adoption that you saw in the budget was essentially offset with those costs, along with the synchronous learning technology, and then just some additional PP&E costs that we've continued to have through the year beyond the $635 you just saw. And then this is a copy of the publication. I always put this in for you. It was published in the paper. And if you're like me, you probably went out June 4th and was looking through the Statesman to make sure it was in there, and you got a chance to read it. So, but I wanted to give you a picture of it in case you didn't. Goals would be, hopefully, if it meets with your approval, the board would approve it tonight, later on during the board meeting. And then we have a whole bunch of information we've already put together in packets that we have ready to send to the State Department. So for us, that's step 2. We'll send a bunch of documentation in the State Department of Education associated with the amended budget. With the next presentation, we'll also send a bunch of information associated with the proposed budget. And so the State Department gets all new information from us and is able to make adjustments for that as well. And so they're aware of the changes. And with that, I can stand for any other questions.
Is there any questions? Just for the audience's purposes, because it does, when folks don't ask questions, we do get all this information in advance, and if a trustee has a question, they also ask that. That's part of the public record too. So I just don't want people to think we don't ask questions around this budget, because we've been over this about 3 or 4 times. So with that, you're up next with the proposed fiscal year budget. So.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you. Well, Madam Chair, trustees, Dr. Reynolds, we'll move on to the 21-22 budget. So there haven't been any changes from the work session that we had. So we had a good opportunity, I think, to walk through all of the funds and kind of talk about the prominent changes and what we kind of anticipated for next year's budget. So, I think what you'll see is a lot of the same things that we'll be discussing again. So we're going to walk through the general fund, special revenue funds. We'll talk about state funding. We'll talk again about federal programs. We'll hit on our bond and levy and plant facility levy funding, stimulus funding. I'll give you a quick update on that so you can kind of see what we've at least budgeted. And then obviously, as you're aware, we'll be bringing a plan back in August for the ARPA funding. And then you'll get a copy of the publication again. So as you remember, we're anticipating an enrollment increase of 600 students year over year. So even with that increase, remember I talked again about attendance and enrollment, right? So during 2021, we got the opportunity to be able to be paid based on enrollment. So it softened the impact of the loss of students. And so as we switch back to attendance, we're actually going to go up in enrollment, even in our budget projections, but our funding is actually going to go down. And so we're going to have a projected decrease in funding of 48 support units. And so while the state gave us an increase in appropriation, we're very grateful for that increase and for the additions to the career ladder and to all of those additions that we'll have in our, even in our salary-based apportionment and even to our discretionary allocation. A lot of that unfortunately gets eaten up with that 48 support unit reduction. And so you're not going to see as much enrollment increase as far as funding as you would anticipate with a 600 student enrollment if you're used to seeing that in the past. So already in our revenues, we were anticipating a reduction in fund balance in 2021 as we kind of worked our way through that high number. So 21-22 will start with a lower number. And so that'll be an increase to our adjustment to our revenues. Again, state revenues were up only slightly, so we will see a salary-based apportionment increase. We will see somewhat of an increase in our discretionary allocation. But again, a lot of the difference we made up with ESSER funding. There are also some other changes to local revenues associated with donation revenues. As you would anticipate, we received a large donation this year associated with our athletic facilities. We're not anticipating receiving that again. We also had a large expenditure for that as well. So we won't anticipate the expenditure as well. And then transfers in, just like I said, in 2021, we had a reduction associated with that ESSER funding, the way it's just coming in with the indirect. We won't receive that kind of same transfer into the budget. The expenditures are going to be housed and incurred out in the federal funding. And with that, I can stand for questions.
Yeah, Trustee Geoff.
Thank you. Ms. Gillen, can you go back to the slide previous to this?
Yeah.
Thank you. So if the enrollment increase is more than 600, whatever it might be, that'll lessen the gap of our loss due to switching from actual attendance to daily average attendance?
Yeah, Madam Chair and trustees. Yeah, so really what I'm anticipating, sometimes I get nervous to get really geeky and get into numbers, but we'll just walk through it, right? So we were at our height, we were at roughly 1,940 support units. And then we fell to roughly 1,925, and now we're actually, even though enrollment's going to go up because the calculation changes, we're actually going to fall to 1,867. So if we have an increase beyond the 600 students, then it won't be at 1,867. It'll go up from there, right? And so then ideally we'll be able to start to see a little bit more of that state income come back to us. I would caution right now we're offsetting a substantial chunk of the budget utilizing some of that ESSER funding, both offsetting our just normal expenses, but also I'll talk a little bit again about that public education stabilization fund and the reduction there. And so we'll just kind of monitor how much of that extra revenue we'll get with hopefully the increase beyond the 600 students. And so then what it should, if our enrollment growth is more, is provide more flexibility for us to be able to invest more dollars into our students.
Jonathan, it just dawned on me, when we switch back from enrollment to ADA, there's all sorts of reasons to look at quarantine policies, but if we don't, that could dramatically impact the ADA.
Madam Chair and trustees, yes, attendance is not really something we've had to talk about this year as much. From a financial side, we haven't had to talk about that conversation. But yeah, if students are not attending, ideally I think there'll be some questions of how we also look at attendance and whether a student can attend virtually and whether that will still qualify. I think during this first year, we were just having lots of questions, right? And so I had the luxury of being able to sit on a committee and kind of talk about what does it look like next year and what does switching to enrollment really mean? And a lot of that was about having districts not have to answer those kind of questions. So I think those questions will still come up. And I think hopefully now that we've gotten a little bit more experience with the process, maybe as the legislature looks at and the State Department looks at how they're going to identify attendance, maybe we'll be able to manage that question as well as we work through it.
Okay. Are you anticipating they'll come out with some changes to how ADA is put together just based on the changes from COVID? Or do you know?
Madam Chair and trustees, they haven't talked a lot about that. The big talk has really been changing from enrollment back to attendance, and really, what does that even look like? We all kind of know, I mean, a lot of the districts are all planning, I can just tell you from talking with our peers, we're all planning for a reduction, you know, just like we are here. But we're still not really sure. I talked a little bit about protection, and so that 3% where that starts to come into play, and really we don't even know that number until August. And I think that's really the big outlier of how attendance works. If let's say we didn't grow by 600 students, or you know, another district did not grow by 600, did not meet their growth projections, and now they're having to pay in protection. I think then a lot of those conversations will start that attendance to ADA back again, along with looking at, okay, how does attendance work when we all first start submitting our first IC submissions, and we start looking at attendance levels that maybe are not near what our expectations would be.
We plan on having a conversation about ESSER funds in August. It might be good to also update us on kind of those at that time too, if you're okay with that.
Madam Chair and trustees, yeah, I'm hoping I'll be, once July starts, I run those reports almost every other day, so I'll have a lot of good data for you.
Perfect, thank you.
Madam Chair and trustees, general fund expenditures, what you're going to see is on the right, you're going to see the percentage makeup of our expenses won't change, but relatively, but really the number of our expenditures are, because as you remember, our revenues are trailing a little bit, and so we're using $8 million, at least initially, to offset our budget associated with ESSER funding. And so that'll be a lot of that change we're going to look to do. Other things that did go up, transportation expenses, we anticipate those will start to roll back more into normal, and we have contract increases that are already agreed to in our contract. Health insurance costs we're anticipating went up 6%, and then we brought on Owyhee High School, and so as you know, that's around $2.7 million to bring in those general operating costs.
Jonathan, just because we all know this, but I think it's good to just, for everybody in the audience, when we bring on a new high school, we have to front the costs for up 2 years before we get the additional funding for the enrollment that new high school brings in, correct?
Madam Chair and trustees,
About two
kind
years?
of, yeah. I mean, this year, that's how it's going to feel.
Okay.
What really happens when you bring on a new school, a lot of times that is shifting in enrollment, right? Our enrollment increase is not really, and so in the case of Owyhee High School, a lot of those kids are shifting from other schools, and so we're really not receiving any additional funding associated because we get funded based on attendance for our number of students. And so we've just increased our cost exposure without often increasing a whole lot of additional revenues to pay for that. So for us this year, we hope, and we always plan, that we can kind of incorporate all of those costs into the budget. And so even when we talked pre-COVID, we talked about that bringing on a high school, since it's so big, it has a lot more fixed costs associated with it. It was probably going to take us a while, and so it was going to take us 2 years, and that was when we were at enrollment of 40,000. And so right now we're projecting enrollment more like 38,600. So we're going to look to 2 years and utilize those whole 2 years to basically bring in the costs. So it's going to have a little bit, you're going to see on the next slide, where we're going to have a fund balance impact, at least on paper. We're going to plan for the worst, that we'll have to use some savings during the first year as we manage through the second year.
Till enrollment comes in at the projection. Okay, thank you.
So moving on, as you see, we'll have projected fund balance of 34.8. We've kind of been, we had a fund balance deficit previous to this of roughly $500,000, and then really the new high school of the 2.7. And so I put this slide in because later on I'm going to talk about policy 801.8, and we're going to talk about how it's not a balanced budget. And our revenues and expenses do equal, so from that perspective, it is a balanced budget, but we're going to utilize some of our savings next year associated with Owyhee High School, and so in that effect, we're spending down our reserves, and so that's why I'll be asking for a suspension of the policy.
That's pretty common for us to do that when we open a new school, though, correct?
Madam Chair and trustees, so I can tell you, since I have been here, we haven't necessarily had to do it, but we haven't opened a high school since I've been here. So an elementary school is much a lesser impact.
Okay.
So it's roughly 750 to 800,000. So it's a little bit easier to manage through what that looks like to open a school. I think this one was more of a, we kind of knew that the opening the high school was going to be more of a financial impact. So even again, like I said, pre-COVID, we were talking about that we were probably going to have to use fund balance for 1 year while we incorporated the second year with the increased revenues and pulled those costs in. So I don't know if it's typical, but it wasn't unplanned.
Okay. Thanks.
Special revenue funds. So these are all the different type of state special revenue funding that we receive. Charter school facilities, college and career advisors. We receive funding for content and curriculum. Might not be the greatest example. In a typical year we would. This next year we won't be receiving funding for that, but IT staffing, leadership premiums. I essentially put on a one-page slide this time rather than walking through each one of them, the financial impact of what it's going to be for those. As you'll notice, a lot of them have some small decreases, and that's really, again, the attendance to ADA adjustment. And so as we're rolling back, our support units are going down, and that attendance to ADA adjustment is now also impacting how we're receiving this funding as well. And so we would anticipate a little bit of a reduction, and then again, like Trustee Kofeld brought up, if our enrollment comes in better and our attendance perhaps meets our projection, exceeds our projections, we'll receive additional funding. I did want to highlight, content and curriculum and gifted and talented are going to receive 0 again this year. And so for those two areas, one, content and curriculum managed by Mr. DeLashman and gifted and talented by Ms. Hinkson. We'll continue to monitor kind of those budgets and those funds that may need to be some costs we shift into the general fund. We'll do what we've done for this year already, is we'll just continue to manage impact and take a look at that. IT staffing and technology, both again will receive a reduction, and then I've kind of noticed that they're both down from pre-COVID levels. But again, those are the funds where we'll be monitoring them throughout the year. So those are the areas where I continue to not only monitor the dollars they're going to receive, but also the impact, because a lot of those costs and expenses are relatively fixed, as you would imagine, in particular in IT staffing and with all our one-to-one devices. We have a lot of work we're going to be doing next year already. And so there'll be some expenses that have the potential for a general fund impact. We'll kind of keep an eye on revenue streams and manage that throughout the year. And this is just a pictorial breakdown of the other state funding, very similar to the slide that you saw in May. So now we receive other state funding associated with federal funds. Title and IDEA are going to be the ones that we talk about quite often, and then we'll have a conversation, although now we talk about it quite often, ESSER funding as well. So Title I, it's not unusual to get these adjustments for these line items. So Title I went down, Title II went up, Title IV received an increase. These are really preliminary allocations, so we're working on submitting our application for that. And then again, a lot of these allocations will actually continue to adjust until September. And so if you work in school finance, you're kind of used to that process, and so you just continue to monitor, and over the summer you try to grab any tidbits you can of information, and then you look at budget adjustments, and then I'll meet with the directors and continue to work through what the impact of those will be.
I don't live in the world of education. Can you tell us what the 4 different titles are for? Oh. And if not, later is fine. Title I's familiar to me. Title II, III, and IV are not.
Madam Chair, I'm going to call a lifeline.
Miss Superintendent.
The title programs were established a long time ago through the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and they haven't changed substantially over the years. But Title I is, in general, it's a program that focuses on children at risk and emphasizes the importance of literacy and some math. Title II is a program that has changed over the years, but currently a lot of it is used for professional development, and especially in the world of administration and growing people professionally. The money, it has more flexibility in how you use it across the district. Title III is usually focused predominantly for our English language learners over the years, and Title IV is,
Community schools.
yeah, it's thank you, David. Yeah.
So student support and academic enrichment, thank you. Appreciate that. I didn't have my laptop, I could have Googled it. Thank you.
So moving on, IDA Part B funding. So this is specifically for Ramona Lee's funding associated with special education. Received roughly a $60,000 increase. So not a large increase, especially as we look for that fund. Also has to handle salary increases. IDA Part B preschool funding received a $1,200 increase. What will be nice going into next year is we'll receive that $1.7 million in IDA stimulus funding, and so we'll be able to utilize that. I always say each time I present, I'm going to have more information for you on what's allowable. Stay tuned. So I was in a meeting where somebody had shared a couple of things, but I still have yet to receive what the actual allowable expenses and period of performance are going to be. But we know the dollar amount, so we plan for that. So some of our other funds, as we're going to talk about capital funds, we'll talk about bond funds. So in this case, the debt service fund, that's where we levy dollars associated with our bonds. So these are bonds that have already been approved by taxpayers, and so now we're levying the dollar amount associated with that to pay back on that debt. And so this fund's always a little bit tough to calculate right now. We received a market update from Mr. McQuaid at the last board meeting. So we do anticipate that market rates will go up, but that's an input that really doesn't get finalized until August, and that's one of the numbers that we use. But again, our expectation is that really what we levied from previous year to this year, I mean from this year to next year, should be going down. So as we continue to pay down debt, so even with the refunding that we just did. And so 2018 bond fund, that's an expectation of how much we'll have left in fund balance in the fund, much like I said before, it's always a little bit difficult with capital projects, but we'll continue to work through and finalize Hawaii High School. Plant facilities, this is dollar amounts that we levy, $16 million associated with the plant facility levy. That's already been approved by voters. It's a 10-year levy, and so that gives you a little bit of a picture of just what are some of the projects and things that we plan on using the dollars for next year. We do have an anticipated fund balance of roughly $5.8 million in the fund. And I think we'll be around that dollar amount. We are having some projects that are finishing up a little sooner, and then we're still kind of evaluating what projects look like next year as we look at supply chains and what is the work that we can do at the dollars that we have available. And that gives you a little picture of the capital projects by type and spend. And then stimulus funding. So this is going to be focused on ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. And this will focus, so you might see a slight change in some of the dollars just because before we've always been talking about ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, and we've really been talking about 2021 and 2022 kind of all together as a stimulus package. And so this is specifically what the dollar amounts are going to be for next year. So ESSER 2 will utilize $6.85 million, and then the carryover from 2021 will be our expectation. And those dollars, and again, like I've said before, I kind of put them in buckets, but it probably won't work out just as cleanly that way. Those will be dollars that we have kind of set aside associated with what will be need to use for carryover. And that was for carryover, for offsetting the budget. And so that includes offsetting expenses in the budget, and then the offset for the Public Education Stabilization Fund and the fact that the State Department won't be able to use that next year. And then we have roughly the $24.87 million and the 6.2. Those are broken down. That's for ESSER 3. The first dollar amount is for ESSER type activities, and the 6.2 million is specifically identified for learning loss. And we're still continuing to get guidance on what that looks like. And then I did just reference, because it is stimulus funding, the IDA funding that we received that was on a previous slide. So as part of the ESSER 3 funding, and really, again, because they're really not working in silos, you'll probably receive ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funding as kind of the whole package. This is how we're going to use those dollars, because I'd love to be able to tell you now exactly which line item we're going to be using it from in October and February, but it just doesn't work that well. It's timing of expenses and how we do the draws. It's not necessarily you can pick from one or the next one. So a lot of those decisions are made for you based on when you make a request for funding. So we'll kind of walk through what it looks like as a whole and how we'll utilize those dollars. But again, that'll be brought to the board as part of a process that we'll bring to you in early August.
Maybe before you go off that, just for the board's information purposes, I think Dr. Bubb and I have been talking about, because we will have some good assessment data before August as well that can play into helping us look at, well, helping him and the administration, but also us kind of know where our learning loss, if we have some. I've been getting really good feedback that we have had some great ISAT testing come through, but if we have some, it'll give us some good information as to where to target.
And then again, just a copy of the publication for your reference.
I'm trying to make this budget tie to policy, Jonathan.
Yeah, I know. We're gonna have some goals, and it's gonna be, yeah. So next steps, much like you saw in the 2021, ideally we're looking for approval tonight. And then there's a different set of hundreds of pages of documents, that Excel spreadsheets that we will send to SDE, different than the previous one. And so those will all go to them as part of the process the State Department walks through. They also review our budget and provide feedback, and sometimes they'll provide some tips or things they would request or recommend changes for the following year. And with that, I can stand for any questions on 21-22.
You guys are quiet. Or you, well, I should say it this way, you did a really fabulous job. How's that?
Thank you.
So with that, it's open for public comment. We did not have anybody sign up to testify, but there's a lot of people in the room, so I want to just make sure that if somebody wanted to testify on the budget, that this is the public comment portion. All right, so then we need a motion to close the budget, the public budget hearing. From somebody, oh, thank you. Trustee Buffy.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion that we close the public hearing for the budget.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we close the public hearing for the budget. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 And the chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. So we'll move into the regular session now. And up first is Mr. Stans with the Andrus Elementary Principal Recommendation.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Trustees, Superintendent Dr. Reynolds, and on-deck Superintendent Dr. Bubb. It is my pleasure to bring forward to you a recommendation for the next principal of Andrus Elementary School. As you know, the current principal of Andrus Elementary School, Buffy Roberts, was recently selected as the South Region Director. I commend Buffy and her staff for the work they have performed and the systems they have established to ensure high levels of student learning. They have created a template of success for the next leader to follow. Before I bring forward a recommendation, I would like to recognize the following Andrus Elementary staff members who served on the Principal Selection Committee and were extremely helpful throughout the process. Each of these staff members volunteered to assist with the creation of interview questions and to share with me their culture, history, and desired characteristics for their next principal. I thoroughly enjoyed working with this group of dedicated professionals. I'm going to name all of them, and some of them are here tonight. Sherry Carter, Courtney Alverson, Natalie Delos, Robin Didrikson, Christina Fall, Amanda Gingrich, Stephen Jones, Toby Lewis, Andrea Scrogie, and Callie Worley.
Mr. Stans, if those folks are in, would they stand up just so we can thank them? Thank you.
On behalf of the executive team, it is my honor to recommend Danny Andrus to be the next principal for Andrus Elementary School. Danny began her career in public education in 2001 as a classroom teacher with the Kuna School District. And since then, Danny has served in multiple roles with both the Boise and West Ada school districts. And those roles include being a gifted and talented teacher, an online teacher, an instructional coach, and most recently, an intern assistant principal at Meridian Elementary School. We believe that Danny's skill set and her background in instructional coaching an Andrus student we believe that with her skill set and background in instructional coaching, will continue to increase the student learning at Andrus Elementary School. At this time, I would like to have Ms. Andrus come forward to say a few remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you, Geoff. Good evening, Madam Chair, Board of Trustees, Dr. Reynolds, Dr. Bubb. Thank you for the opportunity. I am looking very forward to leading Andrus Elementary. Buffy Roberts is a great leader, continues to be a great leader, and she has built a strong foundation of excellence, she and her staff together, and I'm just looking forward to continuing to build on that foundation that they've created. And again, I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I look really forward to working with the staff and the students and the families within the Andrus Elementary community. So thank you.
Thank you. Is there any questions or comments? Trustee Kofelt?
I always have a comment on these. Yeah, no, but congratulations. And I just have to know, did the fact that the school matched your last name have any role in your interest? I'm just kidding.
Oh,
I
in
know.
my
I'm just
interest.
kidding. Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, we really appreciate you going through this process. I know it's rigorous, and we're looking forward to seeing how you take what Ms. Roberts did and grow it. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
Mr.
Madam-
Mosier, welcome. Sorry,
Thank
I was
you.
a little falling off on the asleep on the mic here.
That's okay. Madam Chair, trustees, Dr. Reynolds, Dr. Bubb. Good evening. It's with great pleasure and honor that I bring forward a recommendation for the principal position at Meridian Middle School. Before I do, I would like to recognize a variety of individuals for the time and effort they spent throughout the process. The Meridian Middle School staff members on this committee engaged in specific, thoughtful, and professional dialogue that ultimately assisted in moving forward 2 candidates for interviews with the executive team. The Meridian Middle School staff members that gave hours of their personal time to ensure that they had the right fit for the school are the following, and some of them are behind me as well. So if I do read your name, why don't you just go ahead and stand? I do need to mention the 2 assistant principals were stellar in the assisting me through this process. So those are the first 2 individuals that I'd like to recognize, Bodie Hansen and Andrew Hunter. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Other staff members, Ryan Newby, Sonia Farnham, John Wilper, Amanda Dixon, Megan Hoskett, Molly Skidmore, Jennifer Reed, Sylvia Bradshaw, Tara Skizik, Jonathan Keller, and Debbie McGowan. So, thank you. In addition to these outstanding educators, I'd also like to acknowledge the executive team for their time and energy put into finding the right fit for Meridian Middle School. I also need to take a moment to recognize the outgoing principal, Lisa Austin, who's with us tonight. Lisa provided the Meridian Middle School community with outstanding leadership for 20 years as an administrator, but specifically the last 15 as a principal. I will personally miss working alongside Lisa, and I wish her the best as her journey in the West Ada School District continues as the administrator of federal programs. Thank you, Lisa. Tonight, I am beyond excited to bring forward Rachel Edwards for your approval as the next Meridian Middle School principal. Currently, Rachel is an assistant principal with our virtual schoolhouse, and prior to that, she was an assistant principal at Rocky Mountain High School, and prior to that, at Sawtooth Middle School. Rachel has also been in our district as a counselor and a teacher. Rachel is an outstanding instructional leader that will continue to enhance the structure and support needed for students and staff to be successful at Meridian Middle School. The foundation for her success will be her ability to create and maintain relationships while providing a strong focus on improving achievement for all students. Trustees, Dr. Reynolds, Dr. Bubb, it is without hesitation that I recommend Rachel Edwards as the next principal for Meridian Middle School. Rachel is here to share a few words and to answer any questions you may have this evening. Rachel.
Madam Chair, trustees, Dr. Reynolds, and Dr. Bubb, I just want to let you know how humbled and grateful I am to be able to be a part of Meridian Middle School. Lisa Austin has done such an amazing job, and to step into her shoes and be able to carry on what she has done, I am humbled. I'm so excited to work with the staff. They are amazing. I know that Meridian Middle School is such a special place, and I really think that I have the dream team in vice principals, Bodie Hansen and Andrew Hunter. They have such drive and heart, and I'm just really excited to work alongside them in continuing the growth of the students at Meridian Middle. So thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Kofelt?
She beat me to it. Yeah, no, congratulations. I'm always excited for folks as they continue and they kind of progress through professional development. It's exciting to take on new challenges, so congratulations on your selection.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I had a conversation today with a couple staff from the district around the culture of a school. And we've had a lot of changes in leadership this year. And I think it's when a school has a good culture, being able to continue, that's just a really great thing and to expand on it. So we look forward to your expansion and your movement at Meridian Middle. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right, you're off the hook. Well, the next item up on our agenda is the consent agenda. So open that up for any motions or movement on the consent agenda. Trustee Ozuna.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the consent agenda, which includes approval for the 2 new principals.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Madam Chair, I'll second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the consent agenda as submitted. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you. Chair votes aye as well, so the motion carries 5-0. And now we're up for the discussion item, update on the pandemic operational plan. And I thought it might be timely right now to just say it's really great to see all your faces. So, Dr. Bubba, are you going to do that from here or from down there? What's your choice?
I can do it from right here if that's okay.
That's fine. So, great. The floor is yours.
All right. Madam Chair, trustees, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you tonight regarding the fall operational plan. This has been a topic that has been much discussion and investigation over the past month. It is our intent to provide clear direction to our families and staff so they can plan accordingly as we head into the upcoming school year. As we learned throughout the pandemic, situations can be fluid, and we will continue to work in partnership with our health professionals and families to provide safe learning environments for all of our students. Prior to discussing the mask policy that was implemented this last year, I would like to recap some critical information that has already been approved by the Board of Trustees. First, we expect to have all K-12 in-person schools operating with students 5 days per week, thus eliminating the standardized use of remote Mondays. The board recently approved a bell schedule that is similar to the schedule that was followed prior to the adjustments that were made to meet the guidelines set forth in the pandemic operational plan. In short, the schedules are as follows. Elementary school bell schedule, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, 9:10 with a release time of 3:55. Wednesday, late start, 9:25 with a release time of 3:55. Middle school schedules, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, with an 8:15 start time and a 3 p.m. end time. Wednesdays late start, 8:30 a.m. start time with a 3 p.m. end. High schools, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday with a 7:40 start time and a 2:34 release time. Wednesday late start, an 8 a.m. start time with a 2:38 release time. Additionally, we plan to return to the standard A-B block schedule at our high schools that has been traditional throughout West Ada School District prior to the virus. Our late start day will return to Wednesdays throughout the district to provide a dedicated opportunity for teachers to work within their professional learning communities. Now, as we move into the mass, I would like to start the discussion tonight regarding the mask requirement currently held in the student handbook with a brief review of our investigation. We have had the opportunity to critically analyze the operational impacts and the health impact regarding the mask decision. From an operational and choice standpoint, we have both virtual and in-person options in place for our families in the fall. We recognize and appreciate the opportunity that our staff has been able to obtain the vaccine. At this time, we estimate approximately 80% of our staff have received the vaccination. Families, students, and community members continue to get vaccinated throughout our schools, and we expect this trend to continue throughout the summer. We have deliberately engaged with health professionals, school staff, and stakeholders regarding our mask policy, current confirmed cases, and quarantine policies. The CDC and Central District Health continues to work with our schools to provide guidance. We are happy to report that the number of students on quarantine that have turned into positive cases over the past 90 days is at about 1%. Additionally, our regional positivity rate, currently as tracked by CDH, was at 3.94% at the end of April and 2.62% at the end of May. The trend line continues to move in the right direction. Masks are just one of the safety protocols currently used within our schools to mitigate the spread of the virus. We continue to expect to use other mitigating recommendations throughout our schools next year. Based on our findings, we are very comfortable making the following recommendations to the board. First, it is recommended to remove the mask requirement from the student handbook for the 21-22 school year. The second recommendation involves the pandemic operational plan. In the pandemic operational plan, there is a decision-making process. We have outlined and given, where it is outlined and given the authority to the superintendent to make operational decisions regarding the learning environment. It currently states that the information detailed below is the general process that is used when making decisions regarding the potential transition of a classroom, program, or school to remote learning. Each decision is situational, specific to and process and conversations that lead to the decisions may deviate from this general process. Ultimately, the superintendent has the authority to transition a school, classroom, or program to remote. School operation decisions will be based on an in-depth review of the school's last 14 days of positive cases in conjunction with the review of the data provided on the West Ada School District Leadership Dashboard. The West Ada School District COVID-19 Leadership Dashboard includes 7 data points that are used for decision making. It is recommended to amend this to the information detailed below is the general process that is used when making decisions regarding the potential modification of a classroom, program, school environment based on the identification of COVID-19 transmissions. Each decision is situational, specific, and the process and conversations that lead to the decision may deviate from this general process. Ultimately, the superintendent has the authority to make operational decisions, if necessary, to mitigate the spread of COVID-19, which includes, but is not limited to, implementing a mask requirement and/or transitioning a classroom into hybrid learning or remote learning. School operational decisions will be based upon an in-depth review of the situation at that school, classroom, or within that program. Assistant Superintendent Brett Heller are here. Health Services Supervisor Tracy Garner and myself can answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Is there any questions? Trustee Capel.
Johnson, this is Ed.
Oh, Trustee Klopfenstein.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I just had one question for Dr. Bubb. some emails that I've received over the past few days. Basically, everyone that I've talked to is very much in support of this. It makes sense. I agree. I'm pretty much the same. The question is that elementary school kids don't have a vaccine to go to. And is that a concern for the administration at this time?
Dr. Bubb.
Madam Chair, Trustee Kloppenstein, it is obviously something that we will always take into consideration as we look forward and we plan. It's part of the numbers that we will continue to look at to see if we have any concerns. We have options for our patrons now with people being able to go into virtual schoolhouse, with our kids being able to opt into virtual schoolhouse. Also within those classrooms, it's much easier than at the middle school or high school level to be able to pod those classes and keep those kids closer together so there's not the transition points that you see in the middle schools and the high schools. So yes, it's part of our operational plan and we will keep a close eye on it, but we feel very comfortable with the recommendation.
Trustee Kloppenstein, any follow-up?
Actually, if I may, the one question I had was, so what other mitigation measures do we have for elementary school kids? Being that masks will be optional, distance is difficult, I assume, because we're going back to basically mid-20s to high 20s for some classrooms. What other mitigation measures are you thinking of?
Dr. Bubb.
Yeah. Madam Chair, Trustee Kloppenstein, I would say some of the other mitigating factors would be increased airflow within classrooms, sanitation as they walk into classrooms, washing hands, traditional mitigating factors that we use within a lot of areas. We would continue those. We also sanitize classrooms on a regular basis. We would increase or maintain those sanitation processes that currently are in place due to COVID-19. Okay.
Finally, I guess, thank you for that. I do appreciate it. I do have concerns with that, but a lot of those mitigation measures really do rely back on masks. But again, I understand the need to go for an optional mask policy. I guess I'm just curious, what would be your measure to, again, talking for parents who are concerned about this issue, what would be your measure to go and move a classroom to hybrid? What are you actually looking for to make that change?
Dr. Bubb.
Madam Chair, Trustee Kloppenstein, I think every situation is really based on what we're seeing in that classroom, and it's really hard to say, hey, what that would be. I think if we saw community spread, extensive community spread within a school, obviously school student safety is of our utmost concern, and we would make sure that we met as a committee. That wouldn't be a decision that was just made with myself. We would make sure we utilized our resources. We use our medical professionals. We'd bring them involved in that. My hope is that we'd never get to that situation, but we would use all resources to make sure that decision is made in the health interests of all of our kids.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Trustee Ozuna.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Bubb. First, I just want to say I am supportive of this plan. My question is, what is the deadline for entering into the virtual schoolhouse? And for anybody that makes that decision that then wants to move out, if a vaccine becomes available for the younger kids, when can they move back out into the traditional classroom?
Madam Chair, Trustee Ozuna, what we have said as of right now, deadline to move into virtual schoolhouse or to is 2 weeks after school starts, and I don't know. I believe what we have said is 2 weeks after school starts. So parents would have that choice up into them. I will tell you that elementary school, it's probably a little bit easier as we look at the vaccine and things like that. For our elementary school families, it's a little bit easier for them to transition into virtual schoolhouse. We'll have to look at those at a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. Maybe I can just add some history too, because a few of us have been on the board through full COVID and a few have came in the middle of it. So when we moved to all K through 5 to full-time in October, we also allowed parents who had children to choose to move to virtual schoolhouse or to move out of virtual schoolhouse at that time. It was a little bit easier with the numbers that were in the virtual schoolhouse at that time. So it was a case-by-case basis, and the principal at the school worked with the principal at virtual schoolhouse, and those movements were made based on a case-by-case basis. So that is a little bit different than we were able to do with middle and high school at that time. The other items of information that have came before the board in the past year has been around the situationally specific decisions, and I'm not going to remember all of it, but Tracy Garner walked us through a whole process that happens on each one of those. And we also have in our pandemic plan defined definitions of what constitutes outbreak, and I can't remember the other term. Yeah. Cluster, yeah. So we have some parameters, and then others are very situationally specific. So just kind of that history, because I just wanted us to all have that same context. So, is there any other questions? Trustee Kofelt.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'm definitely supportive of this recommendation, and I'd also like to, include in the discussion. Looking at taking our 4 modified schedule schools that I think they have 9 days left, something like that, and maybe considering taking them under this same new policy of mask optional for the remaining days. And my reason for that is that, one, if we move to this policy, which I'm supportive of, then we're basically going to have a different policy for 2 different programs operating within the district. Secondly, our elementary folks are really at our lowest risk. If you look at the data on the board, it's, well, other than high school, but high school's 0 because they're out now. But extremely low. And then if you look at our community spread within Ada County, is very low, and these kids are I think already doing a lot of socializing amongst each other. So it would, it just seems to me that it would just create a bit more symmetry through our policy in the district. And I mention all of that because I just want to make sure I'm not missing something, and I'll pose this question. Is there a reason why we would not want to do that?
I'm assuming that question's for Dr.
Yes.
Bubb.
Madam Chair, Trustee Kofelt, we operationally are prepared to move our modified schools into an optional mask situation.
Trustee Ozuna.
Can I ask a follow-up on that?
Sure.
Do you believe that you have support from the principals of those buildings to move ahead with optional for the remainder of the school year, or will that create a problem for them?
Madam Chair, Trustee Ozuna, I would say that we've had discussions with, knowing that this is a possibility, we've had discussion with all of our modified principals in preparation of this.
Trustee Buffy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just need some clarification because that isn't included in the recommendation, so I don't understand why it wasn't included if that is what you're prepared to recommend.
Dr. Bubb.
Yep, Madam Chair, Trustee Buffy, it wasn't included in the recommendation because we made a commitment to, this was really operationally to look at next year. That's my role is operationally looking at next year. It wasn't included because we had made a commitment to the end of the school year. I was really looking at operationally, what are we looking at next year? I want to be able to give our families a plan for what that looks like, so that's the only reason it wasn't included.
Trustee Buffy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I ask Dr. Randalls her position on making a recommendation for this school
whatever
year?
you want.
I'd like to know your position on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Buffy, Madam Chair, Trustees, Dr. Bubb. We've been in conversations for the last few weeks, well, last several months, and I believe there's full support for the recommendation coming to the board from the executive team and from the principals. There was discussion. It wasn't always an easy discussion, but I think we reached consensus on moving forward with this. So this recommendation has my full support.
Thank you. Is there a follow-up? You look like you wanted to follow up.
Yes,
Trustee
thank you,
Buck.
Madam Chair. Just to follow up to that, with regard to Trustee Colfelt's recommendation to make mask optional for the remainder of this school year for the modified schools, what is your position on that?
Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't make that clear enough, but the modified schools, as long as we make it optional, so that those students and families who feel safer having that mitigation in place, then they're encouraged to do so. But for the last 9 days of the modified school calendar, and this is the last year that we'll have the modified school calendar, I would certainly recommend us allowing that option.
Trustee Ozuna.
Chairman Johnson.
Oh, Trustee Klopp. I'm gonna, you're okay
My
with that.
apologies.
Yo, Trustee
Sorry for
Kloppstein, go
jumping in
ahead.
there.
You're good, Trustee Kloppstein. It's hard to break in when you're on the phone.
Thank you very much. No, I apologize. Excuse me. I was curious. I totally understand Trustee Kofeld's suggestion, and I was wondering the whole reason we didn't go to the board did not go to mask optional earlier was because there was a promise made to parents that we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't change our policy on masks until the end of the year. So in light of that, and should the board decide that they would like to change masks for the modified schedule schools, would it make sense then to also offer those parents who might be concerned the ability then to jump to remote or jump to CSH just for the last few 9 days? Again, we're basically doing this without public notice of that change within this program. To me, it just seems like it would be a carryover from what we were doing before as far as our policy on masks.
Thank you. You know, I'm gonna.
I guess I'm reaching out to the board chair for this.
I'm gonna take that one for just a second, and then Dr. Bubb or Dr. Reynolds add to whatever. But one of the, I think you're correct in the fact there's no notice, and also correct in the fact that it would be different than how we ended the school year for other areas. But I guess what I like about this proposal is that it takes the operational decision around masks off of the policy board and puts it where it belongs, which is actually in the operational administration of the schools. So with that, I think that's the piece around as we transition to moving this into an operational piece, that is really how the notice is going to work, right? If this goes into effect, it's going to require Dr. Bubb and the administration to make notifications to those schools to make those changes. So we would actually be testing it out a little bit by doing it right now for those 4 schools and using the operational policy. But I would add and it sounds like we've had some discussions with those principals. So there is some change and some newness that maybe wasn't anticipated from a parent standpoint, but we also, that will happen for us with an operational policy like this for the future and here on out. So I'd add for Dr. Bubb and Dr. Reynolds to add to that if they wanted to. Dr. Bubb.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Trustee Kloppenstein, we have had this discussion with our principals regarding options for our students on those last 9 days of school and what that might look like. And so we would be prepared to work with our families in those specific situations if there are some concerns from parents about a mask optional policy.
Trustee Ozuna.
Troy, is it possible to see what our numbers look like at those schools just from the dashboard? And while you're pulling that up, I'm wondering if it would make more sense for us to look at rather than just making mass optional starting tomorrow, if it makes more sense for us to let the superintendent make the decision for what happens for the remainder of the school year, and that way conversations can happen with the principal and communication can go out to the parents. Would that be helpful? Would that be a better approach than effective tomorrow?
Dr. Bubb?
Madam Chair, Trustee Azuna, I'm going to ask Mr. Heller, you want to pop up for just a second? Mr. Heller had the conversation with our principals regarding this mask optional scenario.
You thought you were out of COVID pandemic plan.
No, I'm not that lucky.
Mr. Heller.
So, Madam Chair, Trustees, Dr. Reynolds, Dr. Bubb, I would say in our conversations with those principals, they really felt operationally they could support making this move. They did make one request. They would request, if possible, that this went into effect Thursday, not tomorrow, so they have time to communicate with their families. They really felt like families needed to be able to sit around the kitchen table and talk about, are you going to wear a mask tomorrow, or are you not going to wear a mask tomorrow, and really have that conversation. Whereas tonight, this decision gets made, they won't have the chance to maybe have their families have those conversations. That was the only request they made, is if possible, giving them the chance to implement this Thursday morning rather than Wednesday morning. Other than that, they really felt operationally this could happen and they could make this work and work really well with the families that had concerns.
Thank you. Follow up. Look at that. Thank you, Mr. Heller. Trustee Kloppenstein, just because I don't know if you're able to see this or not, but for the last 2 weeks of school, so 6 through 6/19, it looks like we've had no cases in any of the, 6/13 through 6/19 won't have anything yet, but it looks like the last week of school there were no cases in any elementary, middle, or high school. And then there were 5 cases the week prior to in elementary and middle, and none in high school.
I did see that, and I'm so thankful that we have no cases and we're moving forward in the right direction. My only concern is just how we're reaching out to parents and making sure that they understand that's their choice and that they have a voice. We have a lot of parents who are very concerned about this issue, and I just want to make sure that we've obviously made a lot of decisions during COVID that were abrupt and quick. And I'd like to make sure that we move in the right direction to make sure that people have time to consider our recommendations going forward. But thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other questions or comments? Trustee Ozuna.
I just want to say, with the current case counts and with an effective date of Thursday, I would support this.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I want to, I guess, just wrap it up with a couple things because this is a discussion point. First of all, I appreciate folks looking into this and thinking about how to give this information out a lot sooner this year than last year. So I appreciate the work and effort that went into doing all the research, including Mr. Heller, the conversations that you all had with the modified school principals. It was helpful to have all that information ready for today for the decision. The second piece, and maybe just my personal thoughts on this is, man, it's about 100 degrees out there right now. And so I also, although I know we're going to change from where we were at, like the idea of allowing the schools and the superintendent to have that option, especially knowing kind of how elementary schools work in the last last week and 9 days of school. There's a lot of movement and a lot of excited kids, and just being able to be free for that last time, and school air conditioning doesn't always work that great. So I would also support the proposal. I'd support either Thursday or giving the superintendent the authority and flexibility to make that decision at the timing that's appropriate for those schools. All right. This is it. Seeing we may not have to talk about masks ever again at the board level. Well, we do have an action maybe later, but after tonight, how's that? So, all right. With that, I think we're moving on. I will say we appreciate everybody's public comment on this too, and the written comments, and appreciate the opportunity to just get all of the input through written, so we didn't miss anybody in a public comment today. But we've received a fair number of public comments. I don't know how many we have as of today, but yesterday it was around 35. So appreciate that. All right, we're up for action. So the first item up is the updated pandemic operational plan action. And Trustee Kofelt, you're up.
Okay. Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the administration's recommendation as stated, with the addition of including the 4 modified elementary schools with an effective date of Thursday, the 17th.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we accept administration's recommendation with the amendment to include in this school year the modified schools with an effective date of this policy for those modified schools on 6/17. Is there any discussion? All right, you guys feel fully discussed on this one, huh? All right. Well, Trustee Klopstein, before we go to a vote, any discussion?
No, I'm excited. We're finally moving away from masks as well, so thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about other things like educational learning loss and how we solve that problem and how we move forward with the next layer of strategic planning. So, all right.
Amen.
Yeah, education will be a great topic to talk about a lot more. So with that, we'll vote on the motion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you. The second action item that we have, because we have been holding off on approving the student handbooks for the 21-22 school year until we had this decision, we now would approve the student handbooks with the decision made on the pandemic operational plan to remove the language, as well as approve all the other language changes in the student handbooks. So we didn't have that on discussion, but I wanted to make sure everybody knew why that was on the agenda. We needed to have action 1 in order to do action 2. So with that, I would entertain any motions for the student handbooks for the 21-22 school year. Trustee Ozuna.
Madam Chair, I would move that we approve the student handbooks for the 2021-22 school year.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the student handbooks as recommended for the 21-22 school year. Is there any discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. Great. That's it. Well, that's not it, I guess. We've got a whole nother set of discussion. But that's it on masks. So with that, I think, Mr. Gillen, you're now up for the budget. And I know some folks are here for certain topics, but we appreciate if you want to stick around for all this policy discussion that's coming up next. So thank you, guys. We appreciate your involvement.
Don't touch it. Madam Chair and trustees, Dr. Reynolds, I'm here to talk about policy 801.8. So as you can see, what we are just looking to do is to suspend the policy for another year. I kind of referenced this during the budget presentation. I talked about the fact that our budget does balance, but because we're dipping into fund balance associated with Hawaii High School and that $569,000 fund deficit carryover, that I would ask that the board look to suspend this policy for another year, and then we'll work through incorporating all the costs associated with Hawaii High School, and hopefully next year when we get back to this, maybe we can not have to do this.
Thank you. Is there any questions on this? I just want to say, I want to look at this policy because I feel like we're going to have to do this every year if we ever have one-time money in the budget. So, and federal funds come in one time all the time. So I think this is a policy we need to look at. But other than that, no questions.
Thank you.
All right, next up is revised policy 603.22, advanced opportunity programs, and it's a second reading. So this is one of those times where you better speak now or forever hold your peace. Ms. Bendorf, welcome.
Okay, thank you. So yes, this is the second reading for policy 603.22. Letter B on the first page was what was a discussion during the first reading. I did add a few sentences for clarity and transparency on the transcribing of college credits at post-secondary institutions. So you can see part of that addition was the transferability of credits depending upon curriculum, college requirements, the specific degree an individual may be seeking, and other factors that we really don't have control over. We can guarantee our concurrent credits that we offer to the specific institution that we partner with for that particular class, and that is very detailed in the course syllabus for that class. And then beyond this prearranged agreement, I recommend that we do not put any other guarantees into the policy that we cannot uphold on the college transferring end. I do want to expand a little bit on what we talked about briefly. In 2018, the state colleges did agree to common indexing with college courses, and this has greatly improved the transferring of the common courses across our state universities. The state provides a list of the commonly numbered general education courses. They also outline the post-secondary general education requirements for each institution and assure that the courses taken at one institution for those general education requirements also transfer to another state institution for those same general education requirements. So I spoke to that a little bit last time, but all of these were in efforts to make sure that our transferring of credits at the college, that they had some regulation on the college end of it. And then the state also provides a site where students and parents and also our high school counselors can go on and look at the transferability between the Idaho institutions. So once again, we use these as resources, and those were in effort to just try to communicate better to families and students. So there's a little explanation on that. Any questions?
No, I appreciate you making that change too. I think guaranteeing that it'll be transferred to the college and university that we partner with is great. And then it sounds like the state has taken care of the guarantee within the institution. So that's helpful, very helpful. Thank you.
Excellent.
All right, this will come up next time for approval. So if you don't have any other changes, we need to give them now. All right.
Thank you.
Good, thank you. Ms. Tolan, we're up for the suicide prevention, another second reading. Welcome.
Good evening, thank you. I got it, Troy. Madam Chair, trustees, Dr. Reynolds, Dr. Bubb, yes, I'm here for the second reading. We didn't have any changes to add. I believe you should have received a red line item, is that what it's called? Regarding the conversation we had last time. So I will stand for any questions.
I just have one question, because we had some feedback last time around notification to the board in the event of a student suicide. Did you make an adjustment for that in the language?
And that was the red line item that was sent. So what we do is our practice is to notify, but to put it in the suicide prevention policy would be kind of difficult, because sometimes it takes weeks, months for a coroner or to have an autopsy back that, the cause of death. So we didn't want to put it in the actual suicide prevention policy, because it's our practice to notify you for any student death, whether it's suicide or not.
Okay. I thought we had a notification in here. That's why I asked in the policy. I'm looking.
I sent something in a date a few weeks ago.
Okay. Sorry, I don't remember it. Can you tell me on here where do we have no notification in this policy at all? The notification procedures?
It just has parent notification, item number 4, if there's if the student is actively suicidal, we will notify parent, but it's more of our practice to notify the board for any student death.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm looking at, it's the external communications piece, I think. That's where I was thinking. All right, is there any other questions or comments? All right, thank you. You're up for the next one too, I think.
I am up for the next one. And I don't think there were any questions or comments on the last one. So I'll stand for any questions on this.
Any questions or comments? All right, I think you got away
What a
easy.
great evening.
All
Thank
right,
you so much.
All right, Mr. Stans, self-transportation by students.
Madam Chair, trustees, Dr. Reynolds and Dr. Bubb. Policy 504.40, this is the first reading. Let me give you a quick history on this policy. We have allowed students to drive within our high schools for many years. With the expansion of all of our CTE courses, it just continues to grow. So we have, I would say, hundreds of students every day that are driving between all of our high schools at any given time. In a perfect situation, we would provide busing for all of these students, but it was determined many, many years ago that this was just not possible with the amount of kids that we transport. So hence this policy was created way back, and we've allowed students to drive themselves. Since then, we've allowed some practices to kind of fall in place, and we want to adjust this policy to match what we do. And that is, with students driving, they also take passengers with them. If you were to go to any high school at any given day, you would just see what I'm talking about. Hundreds of kids driving and kids hitch rides to and from classes. And so we thought it's really important that our policy is adjusted to match this. Just so you know, I've run this by our insurance carrier, I've run this by legal counsel, and this wording here reflects their feedback. So again, in a perfect world, we would be completely in the best situation if we were transporting with buses, but we know that's not possible. And this just helps us with this policy if we're able to let kids transport themselves with parental permission, which this policy states. Again, we'll match what we're actually doing because kids are hopping rides, and it's really difficult to manage, quite honestly. So there you have it. Any questions?
Is there any questions? Trustee Kofelt?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question under the middle school section. I found that interesting.
It is.
Do we have many middle school students that are driving?
So, Madam Chair and Trustee, I'm going to say no. This, I found it odd as well. And I'm, a former high school principal, and I really was the recipient of all of these drivers at Meridian High. And when I actually dug into this, I'm like, middle school? I mean, there are no middle school drivers. I mean, I'm guessing, it is possible. You could have a student that was redshirted, and they hit middle school at the age of 14, 15. It is highly possible, and they have driving privileges. Well, they're going to gain permission from their principal before they drive onto a middle school campus. I can't think of a time when this has actually happened. I'm sure it did way back in the day of, yeah. I think it's just there just in case we do, but it never happens. So.
Trustee Kofelt?
Yeah, I guess my only comment for this is there's probably no harm in having it there, but if it's something that never happens, and then I guess the question would be, if we have that one unusual situation, do we want a middle schooler driving to school? And so if it's not something that's really used much, do we need to have it in the policy?
Mr. Stans?
Madam Chair, Trustee, my opinion is, yeah, we don't need it. Again, I was like thinking of the possibilities of this ever happening. I don't see it happening. And so for me personally, I am comfortable taking the middle school completely out. And yeah, I wouldn't be so comfortable with a middle school student driving onto a middle school campus because they would be coming in contact with parent drivers. And parent drivers and a middle school driver, that just, I think, would be a concern for the parents.
Thank you, Trustee Ozuna.
I have a thought on that middle school piece, and then I have a question about high school. But for the middle school piece, so they have to receive permission, but it sounds like we also have to receive the written permission for the high schoolers, so maybe we just make it students in general, and then it could cover both pieces of that. Just a thought. My question around the high school age down there, does this really happen? Because I have high school students that go where they want to go and with who they want to go with for lunch. So is this a liability issue? Is that why it's here?
So I will, Madam Chair and Trustee, when we talk about driving to and from school, just lunch, that is a whole other can of worms. If you were to go to a high school in the morning, first of all, I'll use Meridian High as an example. That's where I'm most familiar with. 1,500 cars arriving at once. There is no way to, I mean, kids just come to school with each other. They come to school. I don't think we've ever been concerned about how they come to school with friends. And at lunch, it's another opportunity where they just take off. And we've never monitored that. We monitor our kids leaving to make sure they're the right classmen and such, but we just don't have the manpower to check every car and make sure, I think it's just been an accepted practice. It's expected. Parents understand. I'm a parent of a former high school student, soon to be another high school student. I just know they hop in cars and go to lunch, and I think everyone has been okay with that. This is specifically for classes that they are signed up for, they are going to and from, and we can monitor that to a degree, but even then, it is difficult to monitor because now we are in the hundreds of drivers going to and from all of our classes, and hence, that's why we do want permission for them to drive and then, for their passengers. So I don't know if I answered that question for you. In my opinion, if we were to apply this to lunchtime and to and from school, that would be really difficult to manage.
Thank you. Well, I think it says to and from school facilities, so we'll have to expand on that if it's really intended to be before school and after school transportation. But even with that, I don't think we're getting permission in writing for this. And so my question is, does it belong in here, or do we have it because it's a liability issue for us? And so we have to do our best.
Yeah. Madam Chair and Trustee, it is a liability. That's why we would have parents give us signed permission that they are okay for their student to drive in between school activities and be a passenger and to take passengers.
Thank you.
But if it makes you feel better, it was run by our insurance, and as such, if we have permission, our insurance carrier feels like we're good.
I guess my real concern is this happens all of the time, and we don't have that in writing that has the permission. So how do we enforce this if we need to, or do we let it go? Or do we just have to keep it in our policy for liability?
So, Madam Chair.
I guess I'm struggling to understand that.
Yeah. So, Madam Chair and Trustee, maybe I didn't make this clear. When I said to match what our current policy is, we actually have, principals have had students sign permission slips to even be a passenger. Like that just came into effect at some point. And when we looked at this policy, we realized, oh, wait a second, our policy does not match our practice. So we have been tracking down permission, but it's really hard to track. But we were not tracking our kids that were, let me go back. We were tracking our kids that have permission, but it was not in our policy, if that makes sense.
Trustee Ozuna.
I'm sorry for all the questions. Can I
It's okay.
let's just have an example maybe.
Okay.
student A and student B both have cars, and they have done the permission to drive to school, and they're neighbors.
Well, permission to drive between programs.
So this is all about driving between programs?
Yes.
So this is CTE only, okay. So
Well,
I missed,
Clarification, it's mostly CTE, but we do have kids that just take classes that are not available in a home building. So like Calculus 2, we have kids traveling from Meridian High to Eagle High for Calc
okay.
2.
This is not to school, this is not home from school, this is not lunchtime.
Within the school day, once they're
Okay.
there, yeah.
I missed that in here, so I'll reread it, not
Okay.
right now, and if I don't think that's clear, I'll send you an email before the next
Okay.
meeting. Thank you. Completely missed that, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay, and I obviously didn't, it is in here. I believe it's
It's line 29.
line, yeah, 29. Actually, 25. Licensed and insured high school students enrolled in specialized classes offered at select locations may drive private automobiles between schools and class locations. Under high schools, under line 25, at least the one I'm looking at.
Yeah, on the screen it's 29, but you're okay.
Okay.
It's okay.
Yeah,
No worries, you got the same sentence,
Okay.
so we're good.
all right.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Trustee Kofelt?
Kind of, I see now what Trustee Ozuna was talking about. Would it be helpful to include that language that's in line 29 in H? Just kind of add that in there, that may transport student passengers between schools and class locations when parents, so just reinforcing that point, that it has nothing to do with before or after school or lunch.
Trustee Ozuna?
Thanks, Trustee Kofel. Actually, I like that, or even bring it up into the general, so that if you're looking at this policy, you know exactly what it applies to.
Thank you. Any other board questions or comments? I apologize, sir. We take public comment on this one, but doesn't mean you can't give us feedback, so just send us an email. You got it. Mr. Stans, I have kind of a weird question about this, so two questions. One, we prohibit the use of skateboards on school grounds at all times. Is there a reason why?
Madam Chair, trustees, and this one is, as a skateboarder myself, this one is near and dear to my heart. As a former high school principal that was frequently chasing off skateboarders, I think the purpose of this is for recreational purposes. So I think students coming to school, there are so many devices that kids now come to school on. Longboards, skateboards, I could go on and on, one wheels. The transportation is not the problem. It's the reality is it's once they're on the grounds, treating it like a skate park, because we're not a skate park at our schools, and that's really what it applies to. And if you were to go to any of our schools, it's posted saying no skateboarding, but we have racks and everything for our skateboards when they arrive. Same, kids ride their bikes to school, but if they were to start doing their little jumps off the benches and all that stuff, we would, of course, go out there and address them and say, you can't do that. But skateboarding, again, I'll use Meridian High, because Meridian High was the official City of Meridian skate park for many years until they took away the mall area. It truly was a skate park. And again, we weren't worried about kids coming to school, but it turned into a skate park on weekends and sometimes during the day. So that's why we say no skateboarding is allowed. But it's applicable to, again, the recreational skating, not to and from.
Okay. So, I mean, even my elementary kids ride a skateboard to school right now.
That's not a problem.
So I think the language looks like it's prohibited on all school grounds, and I think what we're saying is it's to and from school is okay.
Correct.
Okay. Maybe we can.
Would you feel better if I
clarity on that?
clarified
Yeah,
that?
because right now I'm like, well, all right, I'm in violation of this policy.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I am too. I skateboard all over the place, longboard, one wheel, and but it's for transportation. I'm not jumping off of tables and benches.
Yeah. The other question, and this is just a really kind of overall question, is why do we have this policy in the first place? Like, what's the general purpose this policy serves? Is it for liability purposes? Because it doesn't have a specific Idaho code section it's referenced, so that's why I was kind of curious.
Yeah, I think, again, Madam Chair and trustees, the purpose is just for liability for us. I think, again, in most school districts where they're not, where they don't have multiple sites and they're not running all these classes, you just don't have kids driving in between school. And if they did, buses, again, in a perfect situation, schools would provide busing. But it's just not feasible or realistic to do that for our district. It's just, the routes would just be, you just couldn't do it. Yeah. So that's why it's there, for liability reasons.
Okay. Maybe just a general recommendation is that it looks like we have two kind of pieces here. The top part is our overall self-transportation for students. Mm-hmm. And then the bottom part is really around to and from schools and class locations. Mm-hmm. And I think Trustee Ozuna made the recommendation that we just take out the Midland High School and we just have some policy sections around, general purpose and then to and from schools and class locations, and it's all combined. So because I'm kind of, I was really asking around overall general self-transportation, but it sounds like our main purpose is when we're transporting students between classes and school locations, and less about the other pieces and parts of the policy, but I understand why it's there too. So right. Just a general recommendation to look at that. It looks like we've modified this multiple times in pieces and parts, and maybe yes. That's what's happened is it's gotten a little choppy. So yeah. Let's clean her up and call it good.
Well, Madam Chair and trustees, this was the first reading. So I will go back and take your recommendations to heart here, make the changes, and I predict second reading will be perfect.
Wait, I need you to buy me a lottery ticket.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Madam Chair.
Trustee Kloppenstein.
Good, made. And, Mr. Stans, I'm not sure if you can comment on this as well, but I believe the police can't enforce skateboard policy unless the grounds have a prohibited sign. Skateboards are prohibited, is that correct?
So Madam Chair and trustees, so the way it works, schools are public property, but we treat them as private during school hours. So only students can be there. So if we had students on skateboards skating around during the school day and they are our students, we would not involve law enforcement. We would just go, as the principal, I would go out and ask them to please put their skateboards away. However, on the weekends, that's a different story. Our schools, although they are public, they have to be used appropriately. So yes, they do need to be marked that certain activities are prohibited, skateboarding being one of them. And if we do have, and there's not just students, I'm telling you again, Meridian High was the skate park of Treasure Valley. I met people from Ontario, Oregon that would be there skating on the weekends, and they told me it was the best place ever. But I would ask them to leave, and most time people were compliant. But if they aren't compliant and you have it marked, you can call the police, and people can be cited for trespassing.
Thank you. Trustee Kloppenstein, any follow-up?
No, I own some property, and I ran into the same issue. So I was concerned that if we do take out Section B under the general section, or item B in the general section, that it might cause a problem in trying to get authorities over on the weekend or off hours to be able to handle a problem.
Yep, gotcha.
Yeah, Madam Chair and Trustees, so again, just for clarification on B, I'm going to clarify, skateboards are great for to and from transportation, but what we want to prohibit is the skateboarding in, I don't know, I'll have to think about the wording, but basically our schools are not going to be skate parks on the weekends and nights and off time. That's really what the concern is.
Thank you. It's a good thing you're a skateboarder.
Well,
Give you some perspective on how the kids feel at times.
Correct.
So, all right. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Stans, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
All right, I'm going to ask, because do you guys want to do action and then a break before executive session? Does that sound like a good plan? Okay. So with that, I'll open it up for action on items 1, 2, 3, and then we'll decide if we want to go into executive session and break between, or how you want to do that. But action item number 1 that's up is suspension of policy 801.8. Trustee Ozuna.
Madam Chair, I move that we suspend policy 801.8.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded that we suspend policy 801.8. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Motion carries 5-0. The next item up for action is to amend the fiscal year 2020-2021 budget as presented. The recommendation is as presented by Mr. Gillen. Is there any motions?
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion.
Trustee Buffy.
Thank you. I move that we approve the 2021 expenses as identified in the presentation, in addition to the amended budget for the 2021 fiscal year as presented in the presentation and as published.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we amend fiscal year 2020-2021 budget as presented. Is there any discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And the chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. Next item up is proposed fiscal year 2021-2022 budget. Is there a motion? Trustee Kofelt.
Yes, Madam Chair, I move to approve the 21-22 budget as presented and published by the district. The ARPA ESSER 3 funding has been approved with the expectation that the district administration will bring a finalized plan for the ARPA funding to the board in August.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Seconded by Trustee Ozuna. Thank you, Trustee Kloppenstein. There's a motion that we approve the amended budget, the 21-2022 budget as presented and as published, and that there will be an expectation that administration will bring a finalized plan for the ARPA funding to the board in August. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. So I'm going to, before we go into action item 4, I'm going to make a little bit of a recommendation here. I think it's probably best if we take a break before we go in and do the movement into executive session. So with that, I'm going to go with let's be back here by 8 o'clock. So it's about a 7-minute break. Everybody good? All right. We'll break for a second. All right, welcome back. Because the mask would hide your yawn, so I miss that too sometimes. So as I staying up late reading board materials. Yeah. Before we go into action item 4, just because I know when we come back out of executive session, there'll probably be even less people here. I just wanted to acknowledge that this is Dr. Randall's last board meeting, and I know that you didn't want anything super public, Dr. Randalls, so we look forward to celebrating with you and the executive staff on Tuesday, June 22nd, and just want to kind of commemorate your last board meeting with at least a very kind and generous thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, all right. Well, action item number 4. Is there a motion? Who wants to read? Trustee Buffy.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion that we enter executive session per Idaho Code 74206 1D and F to consider records that are exempt from disclosure as provided in Chapter 1, Title 74 Idaho Code, and to communicate with legal counsel for the public agency to discuss the legal ramifications of and legal options for pending litigation or controversies not yet being litigated but immediately likely to be litigated. The mere presence of legal counsel at an executive session does not satisfy this requirement.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we move into executive session. I believe this requires a roll call vote, correct? So, all right. Trustee Kloppenstein.
Aye.
Trustee Buffy. Trustee Kofelt.
Aye.
Trustee Ozuna.
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Moving to executive session passes 5-0. And we will move over into the executive session room. Thank you. All right. We are back from executive session at 9:13 p.m. And the board has before it the option to take possible action from executive session. That possible action can be, we also don't have to take action. So with that, I would open it up for any motions. Trustee Kofelt?
If we're going to take, we don't have to take anything if we're going to take no action, right? Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
Just want to make sure she paused there for a moment. It caught me off guard.
Sorry. You mean that when I pause, it catches you off guard? I should pause more often. I'm just kidding. You're good, you're good. So with no motions, we will move on to just let the board know there's a couple future agenda items. Obviously, these items have been on here a couple times, and there's an opportunity, they're linked for the board to be able to read that information. We'll get them up on a future agenda. We've been pretty full lately. And so with that, the last item on our agenda is for adjournment. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? I'll second. It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. We're adjourned.
Good night, everyone.